Boa noite a todas e todos. É grande
Good
prazer.
evening. It's a pleasure to receive you in this first edition of the Human Rights in Debate, promoted by the graduate degree programs and by the law graduate program from PUCPR. This initiative, which involves education schools and the humanities schools and the law school, counts on the partnerships from Scholars at Risk and supports the human rights clinics and the human rights nucleus. Our lecturer today is a very special guest, Dr. Teng Biao. Dr. Biao is a lawyer, researcher, and teacher. He is currently tied to Hunter College by the Groove Fellowship in Human Rights. He is also a visiting professor from the Posen Family Center from the University of Chicago. His research subjects are criminal justice, human rights, social movements, and political transition in China. Professor Biao defended cases involving freedom of expression, religious freedom, the death penalty, and cases involving Tibetans and Uyghurs. He co-founded two human rights NGOs in Beijing, the Open Constitution Initiative and China Against the Death Penalty in 2003 and 2010, respectively. He is one of the earliest promoters of the movement of defending human rights and the Charter 8 Manifesto, for which Dr. Liu Xiaobo was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Yao also received several international human rights awards, including the Human Rights Prize of the French Republic in 2007. We have the honor to hear him speak about freedom of expression under threat in China and by China. Afterwards, he will answer some questions written by me, Kawe Krieger, anthropologist and agent of internationalization of the School of Education and Humanities, and Professor Dr. Daniele Pamplona from the graduate degree program in law and the Human Rights Clinic of PUCPR. As much as possible, we will listen to the chat to hear your questions and comments. Dr. Biao, we are happy to hear from you and to share your life experience. Thank you. Please, you have the floor.
Okay, shall I start? Thank you very much for your introduction and for your invitation. It's my honor to be here talking about the China threat to global free speech. Let me share my screen. Okay. So according to the reports by RSF, China is one of the worst countries in terms of free press and freedom of expression. It's only a bit better than a few countries. And China has the worst media environment, and the censorship is increasingly restrictive. And the Chinese government uses lawsuit and arrest and arbitrary detentions and torture, collective punishment to suppress the journalists, the scholars, writers, and media organizations. And in terms of the internet freedom, China is one of the 3 countries maybe that Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Wikipedia cannot be accessed. And there are several government and the Communist Party agencies in charge of the censorship and the propaganda. And this is the Golden Shield Project, international, famously like the Great Firewall (GFW) played a very significant role in the censorship. Or actually, millions of foreign websites are blocked by the GFW, and there are many forbidden zones that teachers, scholars, writers, journalists cannot talk about or do research, like the Falun Gong practitioner and underground Christian churches, Tiananmen massacre, the political dissidents, the Uyghur concentration camps, the genocide, Tibetan, the Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the corruption of top leaders, and other human rights issues like torture, death penalty, organ harvesting. So the list is not fixed; it's always changing and growing. So these are something you can't talk about in China. The Tiananmen, Dalai Lama, and even Winnie the Pooh. Representing Xi Jinping. And this, the 7 unmentionables is from document number 9 in 2013. Actually, the teachers are prohibited from talking about something like universal values of freedom of press or civil society, civil rights like that, and judicial independence. Here's a diagram illustrating how the internet censorship functioned in China. I won't go into the details, but it's really effective in terms of the censorship on traditional media and the internet, social media. And the Chinese Communist Party uses different methods to suppress internet and information, including like a high-tech surveillance and arbitrary detention, violence, like that. If intellectual doesn't obey those rules, some written rules, some like a potential rules and written rules, and then he or she will have a lot of trouble, including being refused to get promotion or banned from teaching or publishing books, or fired, detained, like that. And because of my work as a scholar and human rights lawyer in China, I was banned from teaching and eventually fired by the university in Beijing, where I was teaching for 11 years. And I was disbarred. My lawyer's license was taken away, and my passport was confiscated, and I was also kidnapped by Chinese secret police and detained for 3 times, and physically and mentally tortured. Here are some examples of Chinese scholars and writers, journalists being fired or dismissed or detained. And this is the famous Uyghur scholar Ilham Tohti. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for his activism. Actually, he is an important bridge to connect Uyghur people and Han Chinese people. And he invited me to talk about human rights lawyers and civil society in his class. And here is the camera and under the ceilings of his classroom, and the footage was used by the court to be against him. This is Dr. Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel laureate. He was sentenced to 11 years and passed away in custody in 2017. And Sitao, so China is the biggest prison for bloggers, journalists, and writers. Hundreds of Chinese intellectuals are being imprisoned in China now. The Open Constitution Initiative is one of the couple NGOs I've co-founded in China back in 2003. So it can be seen as a part of the rights defense movement in China. Many human rights lawyers and activists try to use the law and constitution, the legal channels to defend people's human rights and freedom. In 2003, we organized the OCI, and then we started the New Citizens Movement. And so the New Citizens Movement includes a few campaigns, like a campaign for equal rights for education. Here, Xi Jinping is delivering speech in Beijing, and also the activities for demanding the disclosure of official assets and the joint citizen meals. And a lot of campaigns and activities challenging the black jails in China. There are many extrajudicial detention facilities, and this is one of the black jails. And so, because of our involvement of the New Citizens Movement, many human rights lawyers and defenders were arrested and detained. Dr. Xu Zhiyong is one of the leading human rights defenders in China, and he was detained for 4 years. And after he released, he continued his work, and then he and a few other activists were arrested again in February last year. Chinese government not only suppressed free speech in China, but also the foreign universities, foreign scholars based in China, and of course it has been an increasing threat to global free speech. In China, there are several Western universities like NYU, Duke University, Liverpool University, all have campus in mainland China. And they argue that even though Chinese people don't enjoy free speech, but they got the promise from the Chinese authorities, these Western universities in China can enjoy academic freedom. But that's not true. I argue that the students in China will not be free to join the conversation if the themes are related to sensitive issues like Uyghur, Tibet, or Tiananmen. And a recent graduate from NYU Shanghai told me for the whole years at NYU Shanghai, not a single professor talk about sensitive issues, even that can be that are related to the theme to a course. and Chinese Communist Party has threatened its control on this society. Many human rights activists and bloggers, dissidents have been arrested, and non-governmental organizations are shut down. But one of the urgent issues we should pay more attention to is that China is using the high technologies to tighten its totalitarian control. So I call it high-tech totalitarianism. That's really unprecedented. The Chinese government uses like big data, the artificial intelligence, facial recognition, voice print recognition, and DNA technology and social media to monitor people, to control the information. So if this kind of high-tech totalitarianism is established and strengthened, the resistance from the civil society will be very risky and very difficult. And the worst scenario is that the resistance, the mobilization and activism from the civil society might be impossible. So these are the digital big brothers. In China, there's a report that by 2022, China will have more than 2.7 billion surveillance cameras. And Chinese Communist Party's priority is to maintain its monopoly of power in China. So internationally, its priority is to make sure the international environment safe for the rule of the CCP. Like the manipulation of UN human rights mechanism, and the control for Chinese language media. There's a report by Hoover Institution, Stanford University, that the majority of Chinese language media in the United States has been controlled by the Chinese government, and people worry about the Confucius Institute. It seems to be educational institution focusing on language and culture study, but actually it has more rules to threaten Western academic freedom, and there are many other Chinese diaspora communities, non-governmental organizations playing similar roles, and many are gongos, like not NGOs, but the government organized NGOs, like Alumni Association or Townsmen Association and Chamber of Commerce. So most of these kind of associations are manipulated or influenced or even controlled by the Communist Party. Professor Perry Ling has a famous out of the anaconda in the chandelier. So almost all the China scholars, journalists, China-related writers, journalists have to practice kind of self-censorship. One thing is visa denial. If these scholars don't self-censor if they criticize Beijing, or if they read something critical of Chinese Communist Party, and then Chinese government can deny their visa, and then they won't be able to go to China to do their field work, to update their research, or it's difficult for them to get a partner from China. So that's really effective. So as far as I observed, the vast majority of scholars, the global scholars related to China study, practice self-censorship. One example is Hollywood also censored themselves very much. Many movies, films, since its plots or characters or like actors, actresses, because they don't want to anger Chinese government, or because they don't want to lose the huge market in China. There are many such examples. These are a few movies that made substantive changes to police China or to avoid angering the Chinese government. A few years ago, when I was a visiting fellow at Harvard University, I got an invitation from American Bar Association, and they invited me to write a book about human rights in China. But after I signed the agreement, they rescinded the proposal. So and they told me to publish my book will make Chinese government angry and will put their commissions, their programs in China in jeopardy. So it's a typical case of self-censorship. And I also have experience, like my scheduled talk was canceled by American university like that, and some like in Australia, a publishing house refused to publish a book by Professor Hamilton, and many such cases. And last year, when I co-organized the event on the Tiananmen massacre, so a few such events were blocked interrupted by Zoom. Because of the pandemic, we have to rely on the conference apps like Zoom, and then Zoom later blocked account of Chinese dissidents. And Chinese Students and Scholars Associations, the CSSA, they reported that critical speech or critical activities by the Chinese scholars and the students, and they protest against the invitations of Dalai Lama or other sensitive speakers. So similar to the Confucius Institute. So one of their major function is to prevent sensitive speakers from being invited and sensitive topics being discussed. Chinese government also uses economic coercion to silence critics or to shape public international public opinion. And the recent example is Chinese government boycott, actually incited people to boycott some brand which stated that they won't use the cotton from Xinjiang because many evidence showed that the Xinjiang cotton is related to the forced labor of the Uyghur people. And another famous case is in 2010, Dr. Liu Xiaobo was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize by Norway, and Chinese government immediately sanctioned Norway salmon. So for 6 years, Chinese government dramatically reduced the import of salmon from Norway. And last week, Washington Post reported that the China researcher, she's an Australian citizen. Because of her research on Xinjiang, the forced labor, she was severely harassed by Chinese government. And another professor in New Zealand, and Brady, her office and home were broken into, and her laptop was taken away. And for another time, her car tires were sabotaged. So it's kind of a physical harassment and intimidation. More than 20 family members of Uyghur journalists in the United States were arrested, detained, or convicted by the Chinese government. So these are the American citizen Uyghur people and working in American media, but their family members back in Xinjiang Autonomous Region were targeted. And recently, the Chinese government announced the sanctions against European think tanks, Congress people, and some scholars. So these are some people and entities sanctioned by China. So Chinese government prohibited these people from entering China, Hong Kong, and Macau. And they also plan to sanction that business which have connections to those people. Hong Kong national security law was passed last year, and we should notice Article 38 actually targets everyone in the world. If you criticize the Beijing's Hong Kong policy, if you advocate for Hong Kong democracy, especially Hong Kong independence, and then you can be arrested and put into prison when you maybe travel in Hong Kong or transfer a flight in Hong Kong. And Samuel Chu is an American citizen. He was issued a warrant by the Chinese government, and Chinese government even kidnap people on foreign soil. And Gui Minhai is a publisher, and he has Swedish passport. He was kidnapped in Thailand because he published the books about the scandals of Chinese top leaders. And in the same case, Li Bo, a Hong Kong resident with UK passport, was kidnapped in Hong Kong, and both were sent to mainland China and Gui Minhai. So what's terrifying is under the severe torture, Gui Minhai was forced to give up his Swedish passport And then Chinese government said he reapplied Chinese passport. And these two veteran dissidents were also kidnapped in Vietnam and Burma in early 2000. So yeah, there are many other examples, but we can see how Chinese authorities used a different method to silence global critics, to threaten free speech everywhere. In the United States, Europe, in Brazil, this is an important issue that we should think about. Yeah, so I can stop here, and I look forward to comment and Q&A. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Teng Biao, for this excellent explanation about recent events. My first question goes back to your own personal journey. In some other interviews of yours, you've mentioned the importance of your university education for developing your critical thought, be it about your country.
I can hear the translation.
Can you hear me now, Professor? Can you hear me now, Professor?
I might ask in English then. Are you listening to me, Dr. Teng Biao?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would be glad to revisit your trajectory, if you please. So in previous interviews of your own, you mentioned the importance of your university studies for your critical thinking on the global and in China's situation. Could you talk a little bit about that and about the freedom of research in China you have already addressed, but are you feeling any possible way out of this constant restrictions?
Yeah, so since Xi Jinping came to power in 2013, the situation for civil society in China has been rapidly deteriorating. So the human rights defenders and scholars feel it's very difficult to continue their activism and their independent research. So we are like always talking about the different strategy to continue our work, and you know, many Chinese people want democratization and they want free speech, but the space for the civil society is quite narrow now, and so I think the international support would be very important because people in China have very limited space, and the human rights work has been more dangerous, and because I have argued that the human rights situation in China threatened not only Chinese people but also the whole world. So I think the other countries should work together to fight the negative influence by the Chinese authorities. Yeah.
So, posso, Cauê? Yeah, o professor, you still can't hear the translation, right, Professor? So I'm going to also speak in English.
Yes, so can I try it again? Can the interpreter...
Can you hear me now, Professor? Can you hear me now? Testing.
say something?
Testing, sound check. Can you hear me?
Você quer tentar falar para ver se ele te escuta ao invés de me escutar? No, Professor, just my voice, right?
Right.
It's okay, no worries. So I'd just like to begin by thanking Professor Teng Biao for being here with us today, for being so kind of sharing all this information. I've been really petrified to listen to everything that you've mentioned. And also I'd like to thank Scholars at Risk for giving us the opportunity of having you here. So I would like, Professor, to begin talking to you about a testimony that I just read. It's being published in the New Yorker. It's a testimony of Anar Sabitz. She's a Uyghur. She's from the region of Xinjiang. While our students that are in Twitter, they might have seen this because I have retweeted that. She's back in her city after her father passed away in 2017, and she couldn't leave the country anymore. She was taken into detention, and I was really horrified to read that this is a region with less than 2% of China's population, but they have more than 20% of the prisons in the whole country. So it's really frightening, and I was shocked to actually read all the information that she gave us about the relations between the state and its citizens. But what I would like, well, there were many informations there, but what I would like to talk about regarding what all the information that you gave us, it's what really worries me is the way that the state and all the state structure is being used to brainwash the citizens, and how much technology needs to be used to actually for the state to have control over the citizens. So listening to you, I keep imagining that we need to have companies, private companies, actually participating of this structure to make it work so well. So what I wonder is that among all the worries that you, Chinese human rights activists, have in your hands, will it have any room to also get worried about the role and the responsibilities of these companies, these high-tech companies in this state scheme?
Yes, many high-tech companies involve the surveillance system in China. So including Chinese companies, the state-owned enterprises, and also the global companies, the Western companies, and the human rights organizations have raised this issue and have given pressure to those companies involving in surveillance in China. So when we talk about the issue of free speech, the Great Firewall, we have to notice that some American companies like Cisco provided technology and equipment and trainings to Chinese government to establish and tighten the surveillance system, and that's and I think we should not let those companies doing business like that without impunity, and we should think about passing some laws and regulations to sanction, to stop these companies from facilitating Chinese surveillance, and then if they do so, we should sanction those companies. And for the civil society, we should campaign for the boycott against these technology companies.
Well, if I may, I would like to add another question, Dr. Biao. Here in Brazil, one point that we normally stress is that we feel that regular people, are too far away from the tools and the processes of calling or applying for justice. It seems to somehow exist in another sphere, so the daily life and the ways of communicating and the ways of talking, all the bureaucratical procedures make us really feel that even for fundamental rights, justice is too far away. Is it the same in China, or regarding or maybe is just connected to civil rights and political rights?
Yeah. I think I can open the English channel now.
Can you hear me now, Professor? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now, Professor? This is the interpreter. Testing. Can you hear me now? Testing.
I need to.
Could you listen to my question, Doctor?
Yeah.
Testing. Can you hear me now, Professor? Testing. Sound check.
Yeah, so I was listening to your question in English, but there's a delay, like a 2 minutes delay. I don't know how to deal with that, because I can hear you. I can. Yeah. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, Professor, can you hear me now? Did you hear his question?
So I think your question is about the civil. Sorry, it's not working. Sorry. So technically it's not working. I can't hear that one. Sorry for that. So your question is about the civil and political rights influenced by the Chinese government?
Yeah, I was asking because here in Brazil, we feel that justice, the whole structure of justice system is too far away from people. So we need a lot of different organizations and institutions, governmental or non-governmental ones, to somehow make easier to people to present their calls to the state and to the whole juridical system. So is it the same in China for regular purposes? Yeah. And do you feel that only regarding to civil or political rights, do we have a bigger block, or do you feel the same gap between the state and regular people?
Yeah, so first, Chinese system is kind of a totalitarian or post-totalitarian system, and I know in Brazil and some other countries, there's some rise in authoritarianism, but still different. In China, all the kind of fundamental rights and freedom have been suppressed, and the civil society. The space of the civil society is very limited, and the constitution and the legal system, legislature have guaranteed the fundamental freedom, but in practice, that's different. There's a huge gap between the state, between the law and its implementation. And I think in Brazil, many people are making effort to make things better, and people still have channels to do that. But in China, it's many Chinese people are still working for that, but the risk is very high.
Professor Biao, I'd like to follow up on this question and on your answer. Actually, you were mentioning that the constitution and legislation in China provides people with human rights, for instance, freedom of speech. And it is the same here in Brazil. And I've heard you saying that there is a rise of authoritarianism here, but it is different from China. But my worry is, well, what I will be worried about is actually how it happened that you get to this point. I mean, if you have legislation and you certainly have civil society that is struggling there, and of course, I'm asking you this because if I look back 4 years ago, we are all astonished from what we see nowadays in Brazil. And I just don't want to, get further, another 4 years or another 8 years and see things even worse than they are now. So I'm just wondering, how did you get to this point, and what is it that we could do to prevent it?
Yeah, so the Chinese Communist Party has a very beautiful constitution, and many fundamental laws in China actually articulated people's rights and freedom. But because of the nature of the political system, those beautiful articles have never been implemented. There's problem of political certainty. It's not systemized like in if the some political leaders are open-minded, and then there's a chance for the civil society to be developed. But when the regime feels threat from the civil society, like what we have seen for the past 2 or 3 decades in China, between early 1990s and 2000, the first decade in 2000, we have developed the human rights movement. But when the movement has achieved a lot, has attracted support from the ordinary people, the Chinese Communist Party then regarded the human rights movement as an urgent threat to the one-party rule, and then the human rights situation got worse and worse. Yeah, so it's always a big problem between the legislature, the constitution, and how people can enjoy the fundamental freedom guaranteed by the constitution. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have a question here at our chat that asks you, Professor, to reflect upon the knowledge and the skills that regular teachers may develop in basic education connected to human rights. That is a bit similar to the previous one that I had made, and somehow talking about the role of universities in fostering critical thinking. So if there's a civil rights movement, and if regular, ordinary people are somehow engaged, how can some of these scholars, even under so much pressure and surveillance, provide bits or foster this critical thinking in general? Is there any space?
In China, the universities are not independent. They are directly controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. But as I said, for various reasons in 1980s, 90s, there was a process of liberalization among Chinese students and scholars. So the universities in China played a very significant role in enlightening Chinese people. Even though the censorship was always there, the control of universities is always there, but it's important for scholars, for university professors to foster those critical thinking, but on the other hand, the brainwashing and the propaganda washing, the Chinese government feel the information freedom, the space in the universities have educated more people to be pro-democracy and freedom, and then more people are supportive of human rights and rule of law, and then the Communist Party will suppress more on the universities. yeah. So, but yeah. So I think the Chinese universities still can do something, but it's very limited because in the whole political system, the government, the universities, all universities in China are not autonomous and independent.
Yeah, Professor, I'd like to go back to your first concern, or to your main concern during your speech, which is, as I understood, how China can actually, it's presenting itself as a threat to the whole world. And I want to ask you if you think it will be correct to say that the international community has failed in the face of the commitments made in the second post-war period regarding human rights. Because a common narrative tells that human rights were internationalized because it was recognized that states could violate human rights of its own citizens. But doesn't it feel that this is exactly what China or what Communist Party is doing in relation to Tibetans and to Uyghurs, for instance? So that narrative of the post-Second War left us with the belief that if the state failed to protect its citizens' rights, we will still have the international instance, the international community to turn to. So I'd like to hear you about how do you see this construction? Where do you think it falls short, if it does, and if you see any possible ways out?
Yeah, thank you. The international community, yes, we have more and more international and global forces for the past 3 or 4 decades or more. The United Nations, the international human rights organizations, and media, and the democratic governments have done amazing work in promoting the universal values, and they are still playing a very important role in like promoting freedom and democracy. But I think China is kind of special because it is the most populous and the most powerful dictatorship, and it is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and it's the second largest economy in the world. So that's why it's difficult for the international community to fight the negative influence from the Chinese government. Yeah, so I think there's a lot we can do, but first we should realize the fact that China has become an increasing threat to global freedom, free speech, academic freedom, and also to democratic systems. And China has tried to meddle the elections in Taiwan, Australia, and Canada, also the United States. So the first step to realize and to recognize the truth, and then we need solidarity from the international communities. the think tanks, universities, media, and human rights organizations should work together and to fight the bullying, the infiltration from the Chinese government. Especially, it's extremely important for the democratic countries to be united. If the examples of Norway, Salmon, China's economic blackmail is always effective if those democracies don't support each other.
Great. Well, still in this discussion about brainwash and the effects that the control of internet or other social media may have on regular people, I was thinking also about some of these recent phenomena here in Brazil, where we are facing a new big wave of conservationism. And I was wondering, how do regular people, ordinary people in China feel about human rights? Because recently we witnessed a sort of an attempt of somehow reshaping the basic meaning of human rights, So is human rights a sort of a taboo only, or is there any attempt to transform human rights concept from fundamental elementary needs of life in common in society to a bad thing, somehow in this neoconservative way, people think that it's too permissive, or it's very moralistic, very manichaeistic, this reading of human rights. We have been facing this in Brazil, together with some surveillance on scholars and also on artists. So do you think regular people are just afraid of dealing or talking about human rights, or is this somehow reshaped as a negative phenomenon?
Yeah, the civil society, the human rights defenders, artists, in Brazil or in China, in these authoritarian, totalitarian countries, have to worry about their safety. So people on the ground have to evaluate the risk and balance their safety and their ideal. I'm not familiar with the current situation in Brazil. I do have a friend from Brazil, artist. He had trouble when he organized kind of exhibition or some artist work, so we have to figure out how to battle the authoritarianism effectively and in a relatively safe way. It's not easy. I know it's difficult in Brazil. It's difficult in China, and people and there are always brave people, and they have done a lot, and they have sacrificed a lot. But there's still a long way to go, still a lot of work to do.
So, Professor, I'd like to go back. There was something really powerful that you mentioned. It's about this concept of economic blackmailing. So I kept wondering how strong this tool is to shape the world. And I was wondering, what would you say that the Chinese Communist Party aims? I mean, is it worrying? The fear is that the Chinese citizens will wake up to what's happening to the rest of the world, to the freedoms that the rest of the world might share? Or do they want to bring their political model to the rest of the world? Or would you say that it's just their fears are just in the economic realm, or it's just a mixture of this all? I mean, what can we expect?
Yeah, that's a good question. The Chinese government has become more and more aggressive. We have seen a lot of examples in my presentation, but I would argue that the number one priority of the Chinese Communist Party is to maintain its rule in China, and to achieve this goal, it has to be kind of aggressive on the international stage. It's more and more aggressive from the Taiwan issue and South China Sea, and we know the Belt and Road Initiative. So China has a powerful economy, and then it wants to make an international involvement that is in favor of the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, Chinese government wants to export its political model to other countries, especially to Latin American countries, African and Asian countries. That's true, and they are doing that. And they are exporting surveillance technologies, and they are exporting like authoritarianism narratives, and they try to shape the international narratives. But the reason they do that, the reason they spend so much resource on that is to ensure its own monopoly of power. It's not like the traditional colonialism idea. It's sometimes it's similar to the colonialism 200 years ago, 100 years ago, but sometimes it's different. And the core purpose of China's aggressiveness is to maintain its own one-party rule. Yeah.
Great. As a teacher that actually teach for future teachers, as I am at the School of Humanities and Education, I'm wondering on the gap between basic education in China and high and superior universitarian education. basically because of the amount of population that we know. So is there any, do you have any data on this, on possible lack of opportunities for studies, for achievement, for achieving university, and for being a little bit more able to find possibilities for critical thinking? And is there any way that on basic schools, human rights topics may be somehow approached?
In Chinese universities, you mean?
Yes, comparing basic scholars, basic experience in education, high school or basic school education, to university formation. You know, is that I imagine that similarly in Brazil, we have a major gap between these two phenomena. So shall we look with hope to basic education, to the role of regular teachers as well?
It's really hard in China. So before my personal experience, before I went to the university, I was kind of brainwashed, nearly totally brainwashed, like most other Chinese students in primary school, middle school, and high school. The students just don't have any access to the information different from the official ideology, or different from the textbooks. Now, of course, after mid-1990s, the internet was introduced into China and developed quite rapidly. That made a big difference, but it's still very hard for Chinese youngsters to get the filtered information and to get enlightened. So generally speaking, the universities in China can play an important role to foster the critical thinking, but you know, the political environment, the global political climate is really really bad for all the schools. So and also the media similarly, the think tanks, the media are all controlled by the party and used by the Chinese government as a tool to brainwash people and to broadcast their propaganda. So it's kind of a battle between enlightenment, critical thinking, and propaganda and brainwashing. So the recent trend is the power of propaganda and brainwashing exceeded the critical thinking. Yeah.
So, Kawe, we have like 1 minute, and I know Professor Biao has another webinar. I'm going to refrain from asking more. I just wanted to tell Professor Biao that we are very honored to have you here. Again, I want to say that I'd like to thank you for your generosity in sharing with us all this information. And I'm sure that people that are listening to us, and I can talk about myself, I'm totally horrified again to listen to what's happening. And actually, when you put into perspective the threat that it represents for all of us, then I can really see why we should have more of these talks among professors from different parts of the world, so we can actually help raising awareness for this issue, because I think this is like one of the main issues that we'll have to face in the coming years. So I just like to thank you also in the name of the Human Rights Clinic here at our university.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me and organizing this. Yeah.
Shall we wish a lot of fruitful years of teaching and broadcasting and engaging with human rights movements around the world. So it was a pleasure to meet you, a pleasure to receive you here. So thank you once again, and I wish you a great journey from now on. Hope to find you again.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much, yeah.